Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I got the title right this time. I didn't mention this to the three who were on the show with me before we recorded, but when I hit record on the last episode, I said, "Welcome to this early childhood nerd." That's not who I am at all. I'm Heather Burnt Santee, and we're doing part 2 in our series on early childhood matriarchy with our little play on words that you can't see in a podcast, but you'll see in the title. And I'm so excited to have this group together. So today we're going to have some really great conversations with Nancy Rosenow is here. Hi. Did
Hi,
I say
Heather.
your name wrong? Do I say your name wrong every time?
Well, most people do. It's supposed to be
Rosenow.
Rosenow,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
nobody ever says it that way.
Well, I
So,
want to.
oh, okay.
So Nancy Rosenow is here. Hi, Nancy.
Hi.
And Stephanie Goloway. Hi, Stephanie.
Hey, Heather. Hey, everybody.
And Stacy Benge. Yay. Hi,
Hi.
Stephanie.
Great to be here.
I'm so glad you're all here. So we're doing the thing again where we each have a woman who has impacted us and that we love and want to talk about. So we had a big strong conversation about who should go first and why, and Nancy lost the toss. So Nancy, go ahead and jump in. Tell us who your matriarch is and why you think we should talk about her today.
Well, I just love this idea. And I was thinking, there's a lot that these four women have in common, I think, or at least the way they've influenced me. So I'm excited about the combination that has come together. And mine, the person I picked was Sylvia Ashton Warner. And she worked in the 1950s and published her book Teacher, which was very influential on me in 1963. And so when I read it, I was in college in the early 70s, and I felt very fortunate that that's one of the first things that really shaped the way I thought about what my work would be like with young children. She worked with Maori children and realized early on that these European readers, this was in the time of Dick and Jane and Sally, or Janet and John, as the one she had. And it was come John, come Janet, and these European white children dressed up in clothes that the Maori children had never seen and had zero relevance to their lives. And they were struggling with reading. And she realized early on, I have to help them see that reading is relevant, that there's a reason to read, that it has something to do with you and your life. And one of the things that she's most known for is her technique of using keywords for reading. She called them the key vocabulary. So children could come into her classroom and they would talk about what was important to them. And then she'd say, "What's your word?" And they would get that word on a note card to carry with them, to trace with their fingers, to read to their friends, to tell stories about. And these were not homogenized words, as she would say. These were words that were very meaningful to them, like ghost and hit, because last night Daddy hit Mommy, and she didn't censor them in what they could talk about. And they could express what was really happening in their lives and what was really important to them. And I remember a professor I had who I'm grateful, very grateful to, because they described Sylvia Ashton Warner's work this way, that they said to us, if you have the idea that education is opening children's heads and pouring in information, get out of this business right now, because that's not what it is. It's like nurturing a plant. You can't make the plant grow, but you can provide it with rich nutrients, with water and loving care, and watch. And if you take very good care of it, that plant will grow even better than it could have without your nurturing. And children need that nurturing. And I've always remembered that. That really has guided my philosophy of what we do with children. And, I realized as I was thinking about the influence it's had on my whole career, it's also influenced the way I was as I was a director with other educators. When I was no longer in the classroom myself, I thought, that's my job with those educators, is to help support them? What's meaningful to you? What do you love about what you're doing with children? How can I support you? So I think Sylvia Ashton Warner sort of asks herself all the time, who are these children that have come into my world, and how can I support them in becoming who they're meant to be? And I think that's what I've always tried to say is the best kind of education is when we keep asking that question, and then the best kind of support as a director or administrator is asking that question about the people we're supporting. I'll tell a couple quick stories, and then I'm really curious to see what other people think. But one thing that also influenced me is Sylvia Ashton Warner was kind of eccentric. I mean, just let's be honest, her writing is a little bit out there, which I liked at the time. I was, it was great in the 70s when everything was about being a little bit rebellious. And so I resonated with that. But she talks about, it's very sad at the end of her book that she's leaving the classroom and kind of going on, and she's seeing what's replacing her. And the people coming in are, well-trained in the latest techniques, and they're coming in and cleaning up her messy classroom and making it so beautiful. And they've purchased these wonderful letter lines, alphabet lines from the biggest companies. But she's looking at them saying, where is G for ghost? There's no G for ghost. The children love ghost. Whereas it's all homogenized. And I realized at that time about the commodification of what we do. And people want to sell things, and they want us to buy things so all of our classrooms can look like they've been purchased. The decorations have been purchased at the same big school supply stores. And that was something that really stuck with me, that I have to be careful not to fall into that. And also she taught that it's not about our brilliance, it's about the children's brilliance, that we want to, and I mean, this is, I think, just a pitfall for people going into our profession. They think, oh, how fun it will be to write these lesson plans where we'll teach about fruit. Right? I mean, didn't y'all want to do that?
I loved my lesson plan book when I was a young child.
Plastic fruit and find songs about fruit and stories about fruit. And, and we're so excited with our ideas, but here's the problem. They're our ideas. But, redefining what it means to be a great teacher, to use her term. And I know we'll use teacher in the highest sense of that word, as she did. And that it's preparing the soil, so to speak, preparing the materials in our indoor and our outdoor spaces. And I'm a believer that what we do in our outdoor spaces is every bit as important, if not more so. So there's a rich variety of choices for children to make, and then watching what choices they make. I think one of the things that we always had in the classrooms I was in and that I supported, we did have the writing table with the cards where children every day knew they could have their own words, and they had their collections of words. And I never stopped doing that, but I didn't do exactly what she did. I don't think any of these people that we're talking about that we're meant to say, what did they do? And I'll do that exactly. I think we're meant to say, what's the big idea, but how am I going to do it in the way that's right for me? And what am I learning from the children I'm with? One of the things that we did in our whole school community, because we really thought of it as a community, in our outdoor classroom, we had a chalkboard where children could write messages to each other. And it was so powerful because children wanted the next group coming in to know things. And I'll just quickly tell you a couple stories to illustrate, and then we can open it up to hear everybody else's ideas.
I'm writing all the notes.
So one day, teachers were out with a group of children, and a hawk landed on the roof, and it had killed a mouse, and it was eating a mouse, and it was very gory, to be honest. And people were talking to each other about, oh, okay, what do we do now? Is this okay? Decided, well, it's nature, it's happening, it's life. And what was really cool was we always brought children together at the end of the time just to talk about, anybody have anything, you want to tell us about what you discovered today, or any important things to say? and anything we should write on the chalkboard for the next group. And one of the children said, okay, let's write this. Was the hawk bad when it killed the mouse? And oh my gosh, this turned into such an amazing conversation about, well, is that a bad thing or a good thing to kill something to eat it? And some children were, saying, but it needs food. And others, yeah, but that's not good to kill. And it ended up becoming a whole school-wide conversation where people said, let's ask our parents what they think. And so, we ended up with on the writing table, if they wanted to copy the words, or if they just wanted a teacher to write it for them and they could illustrate it and send notes home to families about this. What a meaningful conversation. And you know what? You couldn't have written that in a lesson plan because you didn't know what was going to happen. But what I also know is it's not just step back and let children play and do nothing. It's being very, very aware of so many things that intellectually we have to understand about child development, and being aware of possibilities, and, reading books like Stacy so we know how children develop literacy.
Actually develop literacy.
Actually develop. Yeah, that was a whole discussion. I was still publisher at Exchange when that was coming up, and we talked over and over about what that title of that book ought to be. And that was
one of my favorite things.
Was a brilliant word about it. Actually develop literacy. And honestly, Stephanie's book about, the power of storytelling and fairy tales and on and on. We have to know these things, and we have to be very intellectually engaged. I mean, Sylvia Ashton Warner is a brilliant thinker, and she's an eccentric thinker, but she doesn't say this is easy. She says we have to wrestle with lots of ideas all the time. And that's what makes it exciting. And that's why we had teachers who stayed for 30, 40 years until they retired, because we were always wrestling with interesting new ideas. And it was exciting and it is exciting to work that way. So that's her influence on me.
So we talked again off mic that I knew her name was familiar, but I didn't have her in this educational context. It's because I had a collection of her short stories that she had written. But I had to go do a little research on her, and I found this quote from her. She said, so she called her approach the language experience approach. And she said the intent was to release the native imagery of our child and use it for working material. And I loved that idea of native imagery being a starting point. And it's another one of those things where it happened so long ago, and it happened just because she was paying close attention to what was going on with children. But now the new neuroscience backs it up, right? Like that relevance and that meaningful connection to real life is one of the things we know impacts brain development. And I get really excited about those kinds of validations.
I know. I think sometimes the new research is just validating what people have experienced and learned along the way, and just because of deep observation of children realizing, oh, this is how children learn best. And some of the things that Stephanie, well, I know you'll be talking about Vivian, Paley, but so much of all of this is what is relevant to the child, what's inside children that is so meaningful to them. And to me, that's the heart of curriculum is what are children trying to figure out about the world? How can we support that? Why do you want to learn to read or write? It's not to please somebody else. It's because I have important things to say, or I want to learn about the world, or there are exciting things other people have learned that they're going to share with me, and or I can express something in no other way. And I just have to say too, that even though Sylvia is about written language, in my work that I did, especially with visual spatial learning, children express language in ways that's not oral or written. They do it through other means. Just a very quick story. Right after 9/11, we had a child who English wasn't his first language. And the mom was telling us that he was having nightmares and she didn't know why. And through close observation in the block area, he was doing this same thing over and over. He would set up 2 blocks like this, and then he'd take one and go like this and knock it down and knock it down. And the teacher said to him, did you see these look like planes? And he goes, and these look like towers, Did you see things on TV? And Mom didn't realize that she had the TV on in the background and he was absorbing it all. She didn't really know he was paying attention. He was quite frightened by it all. And because she was watching it day after day, he told her he thought it was happening every day.
Oh
He
boy.
thought it just kept happening. And he was so afraid it was going to come to our city, And so they were able to talk about this, but that was his means of expression. So I think, what if we aren't paying attention to children? What if they're telling us all the time in so many ways about what's important to them, what they're frightened about, what we're just going to miss so much. And I think that close observation of children is, to me, just key.
All right, Stephanie,
what are the rest of
what do you want to say about Sylvia?
Well, I think the first book that I read of hers was Spear Point. I think that's the name of it. And that idea that I discovered her, I was already working in the field, and my whole undergraduate study was on development, and usually really did a deep dive into Piaget's theory. And what I saw was, here was something that kind of it beautifully aligned with my understanding of children's imagery and the development of symbolic thinking, and added this layer of something really practical and personal, because obviously you can, if you're a constructivist, children construct their own meaning, and her work really gave me something to, as a beginning teacher, something to say, oh wow, okay, this is something I can. This ties together what I know about cognitive development, especially symbolic function, and what I could actually, some of the things I could do to make that link to written language in some way. And so that was very powerful. I mean, throughout my entire career of working with kids, they always had their own words. I'm not organized enough to do the note cards on the rings. I mean, I usually would get the note cards, I'd get the rings, and then the note cards would be all over the classroom.
These boxes, rings were too hard.
Yeah. But that really, just that little tiny nugget of the words that a child are most meaningful to a child, whatever those are, that's where one of the places where literacy starts, to me, was something that I've carried with me throughout my entire career. And so, and all of the things you talked about her is because it all stems kind of from the respect for children. And I think that's the thing that all of us have been feeling sometimes frustrated by, as we look at where our field is like, where's the respect for children? She was
well, and I think too, just Nancy, as you were talking, one of my pet peeves is word walls that are created by a curriculum not child-centered. And it's if you're in the middle of Texas and you've never been to an ocean,
exactly,
why do I need that word on the wall? It makes, if it doesn't connect to the child's ecosystem and what's important to them. And I think that's something that we're completely missing right now, and in this kind of streamlined, everything the same for everyone mindset that's going on in the classroom right now. We're missing the child. And if Stephanie, like you said, if we're just respecting the child and what's important to them, the children are going to take the learning so much further and deeper than we can with just this packaged idea. And it's following the children, following their cues, what's important to them. And that's where learning begins. That's the core right there.
Yeah.
So much.
Well, it just reminds me of not so much reading, but writing. This writing ties into this conversation too, with the words and literacy. I had a mom who actually didn't like me when her son was in my class and took him out, but then a year later called me because he wasn't writing anything, and she was really worried, and she wanted to know how to teach him to write his name or whatever. And I said, well, let him climb on things, let him play with Play-Doh, and then show him that writing matters. Like, give him a reason to want to learn to write. Like, write him letters that you have to read to him, or do a little mailbox game back and forth or something, or write down his funny stories that he says. And she just was not sold that would be enough to get him ready. I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you then. But it just anytime we can come back to say, whatever you think you want the child to do, the child has to be on board for it, or it's not going to matter, and you're going to get stressed out and frustrated. And so we have to start with them and look at their goals and their interests and their native imagery, to go back to Sylvia's language. And I think we'll be astonished at how much more enjoyable our job becomes.
So much more enjoyable. And that's my message I keep wanting to say, is it could be so much more fun when you're making it. And when children are so frustrated because you're trying to get them to do things that they don't care about, that's where we start talking about behavioral issues.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be that way. Stephanie, you said respect. To me, I think that's one of the things I learned from her, and not being afraid to have human interactions with children. We think we can't talk about controversial issues with children. That's why I love like Nick Troney's book about courageous conversations with
Can of Worms book.
Can of Worms. But she was not afraid to talk about whatever was important to the children, even if it was fearful or sad. And just a quick story. I told a little bit of this in another podcast I was on with you, about a little boy whose father had died, and he was so angry. In fact, he'd been kicked out of another program and sent to Ayres. And he outdoors would take this rotting log and just crumble it up and throw it. And the teachers finally kind of directed him, like, you could put this in the garden and it would help the flowers grow. And that was about the only redirection they did, instead of throwing it at people. And he did that a lot. Didn't really talk much. They supported him, stayed around him. The huge aha moment was, he came to one of the teachers and said, I have something for the chalkboard. It still kind of gives me chills when I think about it. And he said, write this. This was after weeks of this. Nothing ever really dies. It just changes into something else and stays with you forever. I still think about, what, but here's the thing that was so cool. We ended up having to get a second chalkboard because all the children said, we need to keep that on because that's such an important message. And he needs to see that every day. We need to see that. I mean, it stayed there the whole year, his message. And I thought, how many of those have I missed? I know that, I'm thinking there were times and we can't beat ourselves up for not being perfect. I know there were probably times where I was too distracted, or I had my own agenda, or and just miss those really important times for children. But when we can be there for those times, and when we can let them deal with really important life issues, then I think we can be proud of the jobs we're doing.
Yeah. Well, we've got to go to the next one. I think it's becoming clear we can talk about Sylvia for the whole episode.
I can't wait to hear others.
Yeah. So Stephanie, you're going to do Vivian, Gussin, Paley, right? And you feel like there's some smooth segue from Sylvia.
I think so, because I think the things that we talked about with Sylvia, both as far as valuing children's own words and their own imagery and respecting children and really paying attention, all ties in. And I'm going to start with a quote, because I thought that's what we always do on that.
Appreciate it.
And I have to quickly show. So I have all of her books, and the only one I seem to have marked with little, and if it's podcast you can't see, but I have one. The first book that I read of hers was The Boy Who Would Be a Helicopter. And this morning I got into it with all of my very many sticky tabs, because I thought, oh, surely there's one. Well, there were 100 quotes I could have shared, but
that's the problem.
So I'm going to start with what Paley says about her own process of learning about kids over the decades, which kind of is one of the reasons that I respect her so much beyond the actual ways I used her in the classroom, was how it influenced me as a teacher. As with play itself, the process is never ending. The children invent new images and symbols every year, and I continually expand my definitions of what we were doing in this classroom. There was a time when I believed it was my task to show the children how to solve their problems. I wrote, I do not ask you to stop thinking about play. Our contract reads more like this. If you will keep trying to explain yourselves, I will keep showing you how to think about the problems you need to solve. After a few years, the contract needed to be rewritten. Let me study your play and figure out how play helps you to solve your problems. Play contains your questions, and I must know what questions you are asking before mine will be useful. But even this is not accurate enough. Today, I would add, put your play into formal narratives, and I will help you and your classmates listen to one another. In this way, you will build a literature of images and themes, of beginnings and endings, of references and allusions. You must invent your own literature if you are to connect your ideas to the ideas of others. And to me, that's kind of, it tells what Paley, it talks about Paley's process of, so Vivian Gussin Paley, for those of you who don't know, was an early childhood educator. She taught preschool and kindergarten for 50 years in Chicago, and wrote, I think, 13 books about her experiences. And they are, to me, the most, she passed away in 2019. Once I discovered the first book of hers that I read, which was not the first book that she wrote, but The Boy Who Would Be a Helicopter, I randomly pulled it. It was one of those books that jumped off of the shelf at me. Yeah. It was in between teaching. I was staying home with my newborn baby girl, and I went to the library, and this book just threw itself at me. And once I read it, it transformed the way that I thought about what I did in the classroom with children, how I approached child development with my community college students, and who I really thought of myself as a teacher from that point on. Like everything pivoted. It was one of those, I remember clearly, like nursing my daughter with the book in one hand and going like, whoa, this is your next step, Stephanie. And I think part of the reason that her work was so passionate about it, what hooked me was her work with children's storytelling and how she used that with her, and that's kind of what drove me in, because I'd always used stories and storytelling with children because of my deep commitment to understanding each child as an individual, and how stories have to be one of the foundations. There was the physical stuff too, but of literacy. And but as I continued to read her work, I realized that she was one of the deepest thinkers in our field, I believe. She came into her work with a very strong constructivist understanding. I mean, she called herself teacher, but she was a developmentalist from the get-go, and recognized that you start with children's development and how their and their play. And as she evolved as a teacher, she recognized that the reflection process is so critical to our growth as a teacher, and observation. And her books are so rich with not only her really accurate observations of children's play and their thinking and their language word for word, but also her own reflections on what does it mean to be part of a human being in society, in a group. How do I become more human as part of a social context? And her own experiences as a child, as being the outsider, strongly influenced her work. She viewed, to me, she is about equity. She is about inclusion. The Boy Who Would Be a Helicopter is actually about a child who doesn't fit in. When I first read it, I really autism spectrum disorder really wasn't on my radar very much. Coming back and rereading it after I knew about it, I was like, oh yeah, this kid, this Jason, exactly what that would be his diagnosis. But she was very adamant that if you label children, you're missing the point. You're missing the fact that every child has a part in our classroom, in our community as an individual, and labels just block out that ability to observe clearly. And so how do you work instead to help every child tell their own story and become part of the classroom story?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the big picture part of why I mean, she's just my hero.
Yeah, I'm gonna go read more now. I've only read one of her books, and it was I've got it here, A Child's Work: The Importance of Fantasy Play. And I don't know why. I mean, everybody I respect and look up to talks about her as an influence, and she's referred to so often, but I just haven't done it. So I think I'm gonna have to change that.
I think, Heather, that if I were you, the reason that is true is that was the book of hers that I enjoyed the least.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because it was a book she wrote after she was out of the classroom.
Oh, okay.
And her other books, I mean, it's kind of like,
I've got a couple other on the shelf. I just haven't read them.
Yeah.
But that's good to know. I'm gonna give it another
I
shot.
read that. I once I got into her, I read, I mean, whatever book would pop out at me on the shelf, I'd see when I'd get it. But that was one of her last books.
Okay. I mean, I liked it, but that for some reason,
I liked it too, but it was kind of like, but where are the kids? Like, where's the heart?
Sure.
I think we love the Girl with the Brown Crayon and you can't say you can't play.
That's one of them that's over here.
I was going to ask you, Stephanie, if I'm remembering right, that one of hers is You Can't Say You Can't Play. Or
so powerful. And I
guess that one was powerful to me. I'd read that one. If you want to do one next, Heather, I recommend you read that one. That was
here. I'll do it. I'll grab it. Yeah.
And I think You Can't Say You Can't Play in it was powerful for me because of that. What we face all the time with kids in a classroom is, how do you get kids to be kind to each other, inclusive, really, without, without violating their own needs.
Right.
I mean, that's a whole piece. The other thing I loved about You Can't Say You Can't Play is in that book, she kind of highlights the way that she uses her made up stories to nurture this classroom process of story telling. And that's, she talks about fairy tales a lot in that.
Yeah.
I can tell you. Tell Stacy trying to say something.
Yeah. Stacy,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go.
All right, don't fight, Stacy. It's your turn. Kids.
Wait, to continue on that, or you want me to go to my person? Wait.
Oh, what were you going to say?
Say something about yeah.
I lost my thought, y'all.
Oh, okay.
Well, while you're getting it back, I have to tell Stephanie something that I think that this children acting out, they're either their own stories or fairy tales, is one of the best ways to help them figure out conflict resolution.
Sure.
And it's another one of those things that we better as adults have read a lot about helping children with conflict resolution, because it's not an easy thing to do. But I have to just tell you, Stephanie, there was a person I worked with for years, and she always used fairy tales for children to act out to help them with conflict resolution. So when your book came out, I bought it to her for a present and she just said, it's so confirming. It's everything I've always known, that this works. And I think because, again, fairy tales are controversial. And some people are like, we shouldn't be reading these things.
Right. And forgotten sometimes. I mean, that's a whole other conversation again, especially with Stephanie. We can go another 2 hours on fairy tales. I wrote down from the quote that you read, Stephanie, I just wrote down the phrase, play contains your questions. because as everybody knows, I'm doing a lot of thinking and writing about schema play
Mhm.
right now, and that's one of the big focuses for me, is that it gives us a framework to kind of direct our observations for those of us who feel like, oh, there's just too much to know. Here's a specific framework you can use. But that's what we're doing. We're looking to see what questions the children have about the world and themselves and their spaces and their relationships. And so that phrase, play contains your questions, is going to be sitting with me.
And
Yeah.
I love the way that your work, and all of the work on schema, kind of, it's the sensory motor piece of it.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel as though what Paley and Sylvia Ashton Warner really looked at the symbolic function part of it, and how
Sure.
those merge together is what
Yeah.
what we, and what makes it
Yeah.
But they can go hand in hand, because for
they
some
do.
children, the sensory motor is their way into writing. I knew children who the only way that they would write anything is because they had built an elaborate structure that they wanted people to know it was theirs, and that's why they would put their name on it. So I think they all go hand in hand.
Yeah.
100%. And I think in the story acting, which is what Paley's, if you don't know anything about her, just really quick, her process is, one of the strategies that I found so powerful was children dictate stories. They are written down by a more competent writer, which I used other upper elementary school kids a lot of times, as well as adults. And then these stories are taken and they're read by the teacher, and the child picks out who it is that they want to play in their story. And then other children in the classroom join them on the stage, and the stories are acted out. And I think Paley, as she went through her process, discovered that in itself was the most powerful way to build classroom community. And for me, as a teacher, I also found that was I used to say, if I could only have one strategy that I would take from early childhood, and I was on a desert island. I mean, desert, you already got the sand in the water if you're on a desert.
Right. It's all sensory play all day.
Okay, that's included in the package. I used to say blocks, but after this, this is the process that I would be least likely to ever give up in my practice, because what I saw was so powerful for the children in my classroom.
But do it outside in nature, and it's even more powerful.
Oh yeah.
Act it out, do the acting out at time. That's what
the desert island. It's all outside.
That's right. All outside.
All right. Okay, we better give Stacy a turn to introduce her person now, because we clearly are a group that could just keep going forever.
Yeah. So my person is Dr. Jean Ayres, who is an occupational therapist, and she really is the one who kind of put forth the idea of sensory integration, sensory processing, and then her research showed if children don't fully develop that, what are some of the disorders and what are some of the issues that can come from that. And how I found her work was actually through my oldest son, when he started going to occupational therapy, and he was this continuing journey of me trying to figure out as a parent how to help him. And when I finally took him to the OT and we started doing the assessment, she's the one who's like, you need to look into sensory processing. And, he has some issues with the visual processing, tactile. And that's when I started reading. Actually, the first I read, which was The Out of Sync Child, which is by Carol Kranowitz, but it is based on Dr. Ayres' work. And it was absolutely eye-opening to me. And when I was in the classroom, I always had, like, y'all know me, play. And I always talked about being very, sensory rich, but I don't think I put all the connections together. And so when I started learning more about sensory integration, it just really opened my eyes to how important that is for children to be successful in life. And so sensory integration or sensory processing is us existing as humans. We have sensations coming in all around us from the environment, through our eyes, our ears, our hair, our nose. We have our internal senses that kind of keep us in sync. And we have to have these senses to help, organize, process, and then how we respond to the environment. So us just functioning and going about life requires our senses being established, being fully developed and fully functioning. And when you look at how they're developed through children having the experiences. And when I was kind of going back through my notes yesterday and looking, one of the things that Dr. Ayres said is like, you know, children have to experience these sensations, and then their bodies learn to adapt to the sensations. And then through that process, their body becomes more organized, more developed. So that really, if you look at my book, I mean, I talk about auditory processing, visual processing, and in the physical chapter, I talk about the internal senses. I mean, we have to have these play experiences to build and develop. And I get very, as you see, very passionate about if children are not playing and they're not climbing on, you know, like you were kind of talking, Heather, like riding, we got to be climbing outside and climbing up slides. And if children are not having these experiences, these senses are not developing. And then, you know, since we're depriving children of this, we start looking at children in elementary schools. Why are they fidgeting so much? Why can they not pay attention? Why can they, you know, and it's not necessarily a behavior issue. It's a lot of times could be, you know, their senses are not fully developed, you know, and our internal senses, our vestibular system, we don't give that enough credit as to keeps us up, keeps our head steady, you know, allows us to move about the environment, keeps our hand on the line when we're riding. How does the vestibular system develop? By getting on the swing and twisting it up and going back and forth again, because experiences wire the brain, repetition strengthens the wiring. And, you know, once I started to learn about all this, you know, which was probably about 15 years ago, it changed all my presentations and trainings. And I feel like it really, I think sometimes as the adult, we have instincts as well. And so like when I look at, you know, my career in the classroom, I knew sensory experiences were important, but I don't think I could completely explain why. And then I think once I started learning about this and reading not only Dr. Ayres, but people who are influenced by her, Angela Hanscom, you know, Balanced and Barefoot, to me, it's just one of the most amazing books ever. But bringing that into the why are we doing this? And one of the things that I encourage everybody to look at is Dr. Ayres has the 4 levels of sensory integration, and there's different illustrations of it, but the one that's in the Out of Sync Child shows it as building blocks. And like, so kind of like that first level has to be developed, which is kind of more of our primal survival that we, you know, the reflexes and the senses in infancy, but then that continues to develop to the sensory motor, and then that goes into the perceptual motor. And what she kind of says is, you know, these build upon one another, and once they're fully developed, that's when children are ready for that academic readiness, you know, like around age 6 or 7, when they can again not only exist in the environment, but understand everything and process everything that's coming in. So that's my soapbox.
I think early childhood has so much to learn from occupational therapists. And I love seeing, you know, I discovered Jean Ayres after I discovered like Greg Santucci on Facebook and Kelsey Olds, the occupational therapist. And the more I read and get into it, the more I think this is something that needs to be part of our early childhood teacher prep stuff. You know, this isn't just a silo over here. This is, Mike Huber and I did an episode where we kind of just talked about how early childhood has all these influences from other kinds of specialties or areas of study. And if we look at those old white guys that we study in all our textbooks, none of them were like early childhood experts either. So we've got all this to learn from other fields. But I feel like in the same way that talking about social emotional development has kind of become a euphemism for behavior management, I think sensory stuff too. People are like, oh, I'm only going to pay attention to the sensory processing or sensory integration information so that I can get better behavior. And so the way that you talk about it, Stacy, is like, broadening that, like, no, this is every child. This is even me as a teacher. I need to pay attention. I need to know more about how this sensory system works.
Yeah. And I think too, with my oldest son, and actually like seeing, because he was like about 10 years old when he went to the OT, and like his vestibular proprioceptive systems were so underdeveloped, as was, again, we had tactile visual processing. But when you started going through therapy and those started really organizing and integrating, like, it's like he became a different person. And one of the things that Jean Ayres does mention is like having the sensory integration really contributes to self-esteem and that feeling of confidence. And I saw that with my own son. But when you really look at it and study it and learn it, it makes so much sense. And then it again kind of justifies why we need children running around, why we need them climbing, why they need to be having these experiences. And again, it's not the thing we do after we do our curriculum. This is the core of them developing. And if it's not developed, it's going to reappear at some point. It's going to be a thorn in their side at some point.
Stephanie or Stacy, I have one question for you, because I have been wondering about this myself. Why are early childhood people not taught this? Because to me, this is so important. As Heather said, this hasn't been an integral part. But when you started learning this information, what was your biggest, like, holy cow, aha, why did I not know this? What was something that just really got your attention? Like, I needed to know this information.
I think it was like when I was starting to study it and starting to learn it, I started looking back at children that I had in my classroom, and I started going, oh, this kind of makes sense. It wasn't necessarily, this is what the child needed to develop. And but I think to me, it's just when we understand the body as a whole. And it's not just the it's not just the cognitive, learning the alphabets or whatever. It's the whole body having to support every other system. And if this one little piece is not there, I mean, it can change the trajectory of everything. But in college, which was many years ago, like, I remember, I remember learning about physical development. And then my original major was speech and language pathology. There's a whole other story behind why I switched, but I do remember like learning a little bit like about our reflexes and how those integrate, and that kind of ties a little bit in. But it really took me as a parent experiencing this, and then like kind of, Nancy, to your point, me going, why are we not more aware of this? And I will tell you. Oh, go ahead. No, I was gonna say, and then I do. And like I said, we have so much to learn from occupational therapists, but my niece is an OT. Like when she was in high school, I was like, you need to look at this field. You need to. And so she and I bounce stuff off of each other all the time too. But yeah, to me, it's this very pivotal piece that we're not giving enough credit to.
Yes, that's why I'm so passionate about our work with outdoor classrooms. And we thought long and hard about what to call them. But again, for the funding and everything, if we didn't call them outdoor classrooms, people couldn't get funding, which is another story. But if you pay attention and, like Ashton Warner and Vivian Paley said, and observe children, what do they need to do? They need to roll down hills. They need to do cartwheels. They need to have chances to move their bodies in multiple ways. And where can they do that? A lot is in well-designed outdoor spaces that allow for that. So, I mean, I just think that's such a key piece of understanding child development.
Yeah.
So thanks for bringing it forward. I think
we
all need to learn that more.
And she's another one that I did, a little bit of poking around in preparation, and I found a pretty recent journal article that essentially was saying, let's look at Jean Ayres' theory of sensory integration and see how it holds up to new neuroscience.
Yeah.
And it was like, yep, she was right.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading that too, like, okay, prove it. Let's see if this is right. I mean,
Yeah.
we needed to, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So
And I think
we're
it's
on a roll.
interesting to, her research was done back in the 50s and 60s. And like I said, we still have people who are influenced by her and everything. But I wonder, she was doing research in a time when children were more active and they were more, and now we've got more stagnant childhoods and we're battling our screens and children
Such a
not
good
moving
point.
and the academic pressure
Really.
that I almost feel like her work was a little bit ahead of the time, where now we're seeing a lot more issues with sensory processing because children are not being given the opportunity to develop them.
Yeah.
Well, and I just have to say, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the other studies I read recently was a researcher or research team that looked at childcare in the United States, and essentially the line to pull out is, because that's what you do with research, right? You pull out one line that you like. But they said one of the things they found was that in American childcare centers, 90% of the time children are expected to be sedentary.
Yeah.
So it's no wonder we have so many frustrated, hurting children in our care.
Yeah. But I was going to say, with all of these people, with everything we're talking about, we have to be careful that we're not just pulling out what they did in this particular time and context. And, that's my beef with people saying, we're doing Montessori exactly how Maria Montessori did it.
No, you aren't.
Because this is not the time we're living in.
No, you're not.
But it's still incumbent on us to observe children in today's world right now, and what do they need. But we can learn from all these people. We can learn the big underlying principles, but we need to be ongoing researchers about what's happening with children right now.
Yeah. Well, we've got 14 minutes before the next recording session starts, according to my schedule. I'm not sure I can do Chris Athey in 14 minutes, but I'm gonna try. So this is who I'm bringing, and again, it will surprise very few. But Chris Athey was a researcher in the UK. She was part of a program called the Froebel. Am I saying that right? I never know. It's one of those, how it is when you're a reader, you read the word and you don't really know how to say it out loud. Froebel Early Education Project. And it was in like the mid 70s, maybe 73 to 77-ish, observing 20 children over a couple of years, essentially to observe them in play. And what she and Tina Bruce, also another matriarch, I guess, who worked with her on this project, identified these repeated patterns of play as they watched the children, and so they decided they would build on Piaget's schema theory and call them play schemas. And she identified over 40. I think the team identified over 40, but there's really like 8 or 10 that we tend to talk about. And again, anyone listening will not be surprised that this is something that I've been thinking and working a lot with. But one of the things I love about the idea of there being these kind of, these 8, 10, whatever, however you want to group it, play patterns that we pay attention to is, I don't know that was her intent. Like, she didn't go into this study saying, I have a theory that there are schemas and repeated patterns. She just wanted to know, how do children learn through play? Do children learn through play? What's really happening when they're playing? And from that, she brought these ideas, and so many of them transporting and trajectory and positioning, orientation, those kinds of things. So many things that we see children doing in play that we laugh at, that are cute, that don't make sense to us, or that we see as misbehavior, can actually be reframed as an exploration and a study the child is kind of engaging in. And I felt like when I discovered it, well, first, my friend Tiffany, who's been on the podcast a lot, sent me this several years ago, this just like a chart of play schemas, and thought it was cool. And I was like, that's just another buzzword, and I hate buzzwords, so I didn't read it for like 2 years. And then I thought it was really cool. But again, it's a framework for seeing children's competence. Okay, it doesn't make sense to me why Teddy is carrying this huge bag of kickballs around the playground every morning, and just carrying them every morning and moving through different spaces. It doesn't make sense to me. So I'm not going to value it and I'm not going to respect his thinking. But now I have this framework and I'm like, oh, wait, this is really important to Teddy because he keeps doing it. It gives me kind of I'm just going to keep saying framework because my words are failing me because I feel rushed now. But so many people are intimidated at the idea of looking at children's play and trying to draw out what they're learning. And this gives us a starting point. I think it's really accessible to think about these schemas. It's been one of the most effective tools that I have to talk to families about the value and the learning that could be happening in play. I never presume to know exactly what children are learning. And it really frames the child as someone that we can learn from to learn about them in a way that's easy. One of my coworkers a while ago sent me one day after she'd never heard of schemas. She was really kind of new to real, true, free play learning kinds of things. And so after several conversations, she texted me a picture one night of one of those plastic hot dogs from the dramatic play catalog, sitting on the toilet seat. And she was like, he keeps doing this. Is this a schema? So it was that plastic hot dog, and then it was like a picture of the family. It was always like sitting. So I didn't have an answer, but that was an example of how it gives us a tool to wonder about what children are working on, what their competency is, what the value of this experience is, even if it doesn't make sense to us, even if it doesn't look like something that's important.
Well, and I'm so glad that you picked Chris Athey. Yes, because to me, it ties in everything that the rest of us have talked about in terms of respecting the child and observing the child and learning from the child. And they will teach us what they need if we pay attention. And I have to say that when we were involved in a visual spatial research project, and teachers just did a lot of like sketching what children were doing with blocks, we on our own discovered, in all the different groups, schema of they're all doing enclosures and towers and and started looking at that. But I have a question for you, Heather. I've been wanting to ask.
Oh boy.
And I think it has to do with Stephanie too.
Yeah.
Researchers that were working with this, someone said, these are archetypes, towers and enclosures and caves. Those are archetypes. And the fairy tales, the princess, the hero, those are archetypes. They show up in every culture, in every age. And what do we do with that? That we know that there's like something deep in every human being, that these patterns, these schema, I guess you would even call them. I've just always thought about, what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I think it lends like an importance to it, right? Like if like sort of evolutionarily speaking, if so many different people in so many different spaces with so many different contexts are having these patterns, then there's something that's really important to it. And even if we don't understand it, the way we will get closer to understanding it is by allowing it and supporting it and facilitating it and paying attention to it, rather than as with a lot of the schema play that looks messy and confusing and maybe we stop at just cute or funny stories. We won't continue to find ways to let it happen and watch it grow if we don't see it as important. And I think maybe that's what I would take from that, is that it's happening everywhere. There must be a human need.
Human need. I think that's it. And if it's a big pet peeve of mine when we just say, isn't that cute? And I don't.
I mean, I do it, but also
but
we have to go beyond it.
You have to go beyond the cute. I mean, not that that's terrible, but if there is, you just maybe think of this in a new way. If there is a human need, because obviously it's showing up all over, what happens if we squelch that human need? What if that's something we all have inside us that we really need to express and come to terms with, and then we don't get to express it? No wonder we see so many, quote, behavioral issues. I mean, think of the frustration we're probably causing children who really have that human need to explore these things. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it connects to Erik Erikson and like and I know we're not talking about boys on this show, but the initiative versus shame or doubt, kind of idea.
Yeah.
And something as simple as, I was just using this example yesterday in a webinar I was doing, as a group of children who are walking down a hallway to get to the playground, and one wants to run his hand along the wall while he walks, and the teacher is like, hands to your side, hands in your pocket, whatever. Essentially, that child is receiving over and over and over this message that your ideas are bad and you should be ashamed for having them. And I think that ties in here too with these play patterns, these archetypes that you're talking about, these themes in their play that maybe tie into fairy tales or their bodily needs.
Yes,
we can tie this all in.
We're just Stacy, sensory,
they're just
that little boy needed that sensory experience of the wall.
Yeah. So in the sort of, with the intention of getting them ready for some kind of compliance that comes in the future, we shut down these urges and needs and send that message continually that you're not good enough unless I correct you, unless you turn into what I want you to be. And I say this all the time too. I don't think any of us, or at least very few of us, are waking up in the morning, rubbing our hands together thinking, how can I make a child ashamed of his learner identity today? But the patterns happen if we don't stop and reflect, because that's sort of how our American childcare culture is configured.
Yeah. And the thing that, so much of this, we've known these things for so long. So I just think it's so important that we keep doing what you're doing, Heather, and spread the word to more and more people about this, because there's so much misunderstanding out there about what is it supposed to look like. It's supposed to be quiet and calm and not messy, and it's the opposite of that. Yeah.
Okay, we have 4 minutes. Any final thoughts? Something you wanted to get in?
I think that, I've watched this for a long time as well. I think that we have known about all of these things for the entire time that I've been involved. But I think what we've done is we've disconnected physical development, which includes sensory development, which includes really, schema play, which
there's a lot of movement in schema. Yeah.
We're like, let's look at preschoolers. It's all about representation, but then we really don't want to see children's representation. We want to see what representation looks like in elementary school, which is reading and writing. And we disconnected all of the developmental domains as we teach them, as we observe them. And that, to me, is what we need to do as a field, is recognize, and I'm hoping that neuroscience brings it all back together again.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great?
Package, because that's how it actually happens. And that's how development happens.
That's how it actually happens.
That's how it actually happens.
Every book should be called "That's How It Actually Happens."
Subtitle, that's how it
So your book should be called, Heather, let me tell you how it actually happens.
We have a whole series.
That would be great. The Actually series.
Really, but I just want to say, Heather, what you said that I think is really crucial, that helping families understand schema, it really gives them something to hold on to, where they can start to understand that, what my child is doing really is important. And I can see it in a whole new way. And I think that is such an important point that we must remember.
Yeah, I think families are key if we're going to turn this thing around. I think allowing them to follow instincts and ignore marketing is really important. So, all right, this was wonderful. I seriously could keep going forever with you.
I know. Let's do this again.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to have to schedule this group again. But thank you. This was great. And thanks everybody for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.